clarifications and comments from the principal critique to the second critique, and after that, we will also ask the evaluation opinion of his advice. Without, I would like to present to you Brother Nguyen Zuan Viet for the thesis presentation. Let us give him a round of applause to boost his energy and enthusiasm.
So good morning to everyone. Before begin my thesis defense today, I would like to invite all of us to join with me in the invocation to pray with the Matthias of Vietnam. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, of the Holy Spirit. Amen. O God, source and origin of all fatherhood, faithful to the cross of your Son, even to the shedding of their blood, grant that through their intercession we may be your children both in name and in truth. O Vietnamese martyrs, with the grace of God, you had victoriously implanted the mustard seed of faith that grew into the Church of Vietnam. Your courageous sacrifice has reserved your heavenly rest. United with you, we offer your gratitude and thanks to God and the Holy Mother for all of your martyrdom and your lives that we now celebrate. We beseech you as your descendants to follow your faith in humility, charity, and love. When we are in despair and danger, please aid and console us in fulfilling the Father's will and carry our crosses to eternal glory. Amen. So once again, good morning to everyone. I would like to begin my thesis presentation with the statement of the problem. Um, the title of my thesis statement, the title of my thesis is "Understanding the Faith of Vietnamese Martyrs in the Light of Soren Kierkegaard's Notion of Leap of Faith." With that title, that the purpose of this research is to present Kierkegaard's notion of leap of faith as a way to understand the faith of Vietnamese martyrs. Hence, to answer this philosophical inquiry, the researcher has formulated the following three fundamental questions. First, that's what is Soren Kierkegaard's notion of leap of faith? The second, what is concept of martyrdom, especially in the narrative of Vietnamese martyrs? And the third, how can the faith of Vietnamese martyrs be understood in the light of Soren Kierkegaard's notion of leap of faith? And with the statement of the problem, guided by that, the researcher aims to put the goals to this study that with three points, these 3 points will guide the researcher to have a clear exposition of the ideas of the thesis. The first, that is to discuss Kierkegaard's notion of leap of faith through his 3 stages of life. The second is to elucidate the notion of martyrdom and the narrative of Vietnamese martyrs. And the third, to demonstrate how the faith of Vietnamese martyrs can be better understood in Kierkegaard's notion of leap of faith. So, the scope and the limitation of the study, that this study just focus mainly on Kierkegaard's notion of leap of faith, especially that we discuss in his philosophy in the 3 stages of life, that aesthetic, the ethical, and religious. And but in this one, the notion of leap of faith will be given the higher emphasis. Because of that, so the researcher will not discuss all the works of Kierkegaard. And This study will also present the testimony of some significant narrative of Vietnamese martyrs who were canonized by the Catholic Church. It's been that the church will select some significant stories to represent for a collective martyrs of Vietnam. So now I would like to proceed to the research methodology. It is a quantitative type of research so that the researcher analyze the contents of the variables present in this research, mainly Kierkegaard's notion of leap of phrase, and using the historical method of research to expose the perspective regarding the facts of the Vietnamese martyrs. And of course, the library using the book and the research on website that is the will be intensified in that intensify in my research. So now I uh, the conceptual framework. This with the conceptual framework, the reader will have the idea how the flowing of this research will going. So we see as we see that there's two images that to represents for the ideas of this thesis. The first the image in the left side that is the image of the phrase of Kierkegaard that represent his philosophy with the notion of leap of faith that process from the aesthetics, from ethical and religious history stages of life. And another one image that is the image of Vietnamese martyr that will be discussed in their narratives. And two arrows that point each other, that is like the way to help understand to use the Kierkegaard's notion of leap of faith to understand Vietnamese martyr faith, and that is have the dialogue or have the integrated two ideas to the facts of Vietnamese martyr and Kierkegaard's notion of leap of faith. That's to help in the better understanding the faith of Vietnamese martyrs. And now I will proceed to the chapter 2 because the chapter 1 is just focused on the background and also the introduction. And now the chapter 2 is focused on Soren Kierkegaard's leap of faith with life and philosophy. Soren Kierkegaard's three spheres of existence and Soren Kierkegaard's notion of leap of faith. Um, about the life of Soren Kierkegaard. Soren Kierkegaard was a Danish thinker who is known as the father of existentialism. And he was born in Copenhagen on May 5, 1813, and died 1855, and was the seventh offspring of Michael Feddersen Kierkegaard. With the name that is as known as father of existentialism, so that Kierkegaard devoted his time to search for the question, to answer the question that how we ought to live, and because of that, he emphasized that above all, the need to become a true individual, passionately committed to a path that has been personally chosen. And Kierkegaard was convinced that in order to realize our true significance, we need to free ourselves from any influence of social, cultural, and religious values and expectations. Instead of that, each person need to develop a clear awareness of that, the life of situation, so that they can determine their own path by making the consciousness responsible choice. And in the Soren Kierkegaard's three spheres of existence, Kierkegaard wrote in the book, the works that concluding unscientific and stages of life way. He used the pseudonym and to view the human life in three stages. That is the aesthetic, followed by the ethical, and the final that is religious. And aesthetic for him that in this state is a life which we immediately live. It is being motivated by the sensual desires that would satisfy our own pleasure. And aesthetic individuals' aim is to manipulation a people's situation in ways that would create an interesting effect on him. And in the ethical state, on the other hand, is when an individual who realizes that there is something higher than sensual desires that which engages himself to the commitment in the community or the norm in the society. However, there's the even in the ethical state, then so there's something like he called that is um, the something is conflict or the in the way of living the duty or the way of living the moral life. Because of that, he so then Kierkegaard recognized that the duties that cannot be justified by the ethical social norms that which uh, an individual will be captive on the situation where he must choose either or, and because of that, that move to the religious states. And one of the story that Kierkegaard used to illustrate that is done about the Abraham and his son Isaac. In the eyes of the ethical norm, that it is not favorable to sacrifice Isaac, and it requires a teleological suspension of the ethical that which Abraham did. He recognized a duty higher than the ethical norms, and his innocent son Isaac, that is to obey God's command. Because of the in the Abraham still realized the higher value that is to obey God instead of the observing the duty of the moral or ethical. And in order to obey God's command, we need to cultivate the faith, and the faith that is um, important to take a leap of faith in choosing the either or. Next, that is the chapter 3. That is about the narrative of Vietnamese martyr. In this one is the researcher just focus on the notion of martyrdom with its etymology and the concept of martyrdom in Christianity, and then the concept of martyrdom in some other religion. Yes, and about the narrative about the Vietnamese martyr, the researcher focus on the Vietnamese martyr. It means that who were they, and by the manner that they were killed, or how did they die. And the third, that is the researcher focus on the reasons for their persecution, or why were they killed. Yes, the important that is in the chapter 4, that is to how to articulate or how to dialogue between the notions of belief of faith of Kierkegaard, and to see that in the faith of Vietnamese martyrs. So in the way of understanding the faith of Vietnamese martyrs, that as we see in Kierkegaard, that when he mentioned about the leap of faith is in the state that the person is faced with a choice that cannot be justified rationally, and he therefore must live by faith. In order to take a leap by faith, that the individual appropriates own experience in a way oriented to the will of God. He appropriates and affirms his relationship to God in faith, become what is really the individual before God. So it means that in this state that the individual that should be in the state of relationship with God, and he see that he's the individual before God, and uh, he choose to live by faith. And researchers see that it is worth to connect this one and to see the faith of Vietnamese martyr, because since faith is a life, and For Kierkegaard, faith is a leap and an adventure or a risk, so and also the self-commitment to an objective uncertainty. The God is the transcendent absolute, and the absolute though and not an object those whose existence cannot be proved. And man's response to God is adventure, an act of faith in being who lies beyond the reach of speculative philosophy. And in the martyrdom of Catholic Church teach that martyrdom is the highest form of witness to the faith. And martyr is a man who appropriates and affirms his relationship to God in faith becomes what he really is, the individual before God. Real martyrs do not seek death but accept it when it comes. A martyr is one who subjects his will to God's will. And in the same manner that Kierkegaard's aim in the religious spheres of consciousness is not deny worldly matter, but to put it in the right place. So there are many factors that the researcher can see in the narratives of Vietnamese martyrs, like in the way they experience God, the the way that they realize that they were true individual before God, and in the life of faith there is, of course, in the life we cannot could not uh, see the leap of faith without faith in the martyrs, and uh, by the virtue of trust that Vietnamese they also submitted their will to God, and because of love the Vietnamese martyrs they offer their life to God. One of the things that is are the factors that we can see in the notion of leap of faith of Kierkegaard, and then we can see in this one. So the chapter 5, the researcher will present about the finding. So Kierkegaard's concept of belief points to a state in which a person is free with a choice that cannot be justified rationally, and he therefore has to live by faith. However, in order to take a leap of faith, the individual appropriates own experience in a way oriented to the will of God. He appropriates and affirms his relationship to God in faith, become what he really is, the individual before God. About the Vietnamese martyr, that the researcher found that they are the most profound examples of followers of Jesus Christ. They did not seek for death, but accept it as a way to confirm their faith in God. They surrender their lives to God like an act of witnessing to their trust, love, and hope in God, whom they had come to know and experience as goodness. And the link between the martyrdom of Vietnam and the Kierkegaard's notion of living faith is possible in sense of choosing neither or. Vietnamese martyrs was those live and die for their passionate self-commitment to God. So that's all of the things that I would like to present, and thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Nguyen Viet, for that concise presentation of your work. We begin with the Professor Dr. Ibera for the comments and
Thank you, Father. And thank you, Viet, for uh, this paper.
Thank you,
I
sir.
would like to learn from you. So I begin with uh, basic questions, and I would engage you in conversation. No,
Yes, sir.
I'm asking this question because as I read your paper, uh, this question would tell me also that the important points that should have been there needs to be presented better, I think, and more understandable. The second part, I will be asking you. I will be. I will. I will also identify I have only, I think, 2 or 3 technical comment. So that's all that will comprise my critique of your paper. The first one is very basic. Is martyrdom a leaf of faith? Is martyrdom a leaf of faith? Can you explain, can you educate us briefly on that? Is martyrdom a leaf of faith?
Uh, in this question, thank you for this question. So actually, to put my study in this study, that also read and identify something or some common things that I think I can see that in the live of phrase of Soren Kierkegaard, because for me that is Kierkegaard is the live of phrase something is not the blind lived, that is something is should be grounded in the relationship with God, or in the way that he experienced God. So in the term of, and for Kierkegaard that is uh, in order, he also mentioned that he wants to find a truth, what is true that he can die and live for. So in this one, in the it's the same manner that I see that in the Vietnamese Mathias, or particularly, or in Matthias in generally, that they also is not martyrdom is something is not like the accident. I don't think that it's an accident. So that is should be they should be have the relationship with God, or they experience God is something is the goodness, or something is the powerful, or the one they love until the end, until death. And of course, in the term of that, they may suffering, they to in order to die for faith, to confirm their faith. So they have to confront with the struggling, with the persecution, or something like that. That is put them in the dilemma that they have to choose either or. So in this is term that I consider that is to live in the of God and to die. Yes.
Okay. I'm asking that because if I remember it right in my reading and learning of Kierkegaard, I learned about the notion of authentic faith. And it seems to me that in your paper, uh, I do not know because martyrdom was, I don't know if Kierkegaard in his other written works use martyrdom or a martyr as an example of authentic faith. Have you encountered that?
Yeah, I have encountered one article written that is something like the martyrdom is inevitable to the Christianity. So I think that's also something that maybe also I can relate in that.
Yeah. Well, last question along that line is why there is a leaf of faith? Why there is a leap of faith? Why, for example, you're a martyr, and why you have to do a leap of faith?
For me, that to live a faith, because in the state of the person that in the dilemma that he have to choose this one, either this or, so the leap of faith, something the one that is cannot use the cannot you rationally think well, if he choose that by the way of thinking, or by rationally, or that he think that okay, I have to consider this one good or bad, but in the term of the thing that's like the Kierkegaard also mentioned that there's one, everyone has the telo ultimate, no. So in the term of the thing that one should be, maybe in order to choose this way, so he need to suspend some telos or something that he the benefit for him in the way of the worldly view.
Yeah. Uh, allow me one last question along that line.
Yes, sir.
Because if I remember, you said Kierkegaard is the father, considered as the father of existentialism. This is a question of verification. Would Kierkegaard consider leap of faith as an escape from absurdity? Escape, is it an escape from absurdism or absurdity, which Sartre, Camus, and other existentialists would tend to present? There is a leap of faith because I want to escape this absurdity of life. Is Kierkegaard following that line of thinking?
Um, just there's the absurdity in Kierkegaard, but for me that is in the term of Kierkegaard, that is absurdity is to 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 believe to have put his belief in the uncertain thing, and the phrase something for him that is uncertain belief.
Yeah. My last two interventions are more technical, and these are more question. One question is for you to discern, no, continuously with your advisor. The last question will be a technical comment. Uh, One question I think uh, you need also to ask is what unique or significant understanding of martyrdom is generated or produced using Kierkegaard's notion of leap of faith. I think uh, if you read and reread your paper, I think this question must be answered because in the later part of the paper, the presentation, uh, the understanding that is presented on martyrdom is still actually coming from the Catholic Christian tradition understanding of martyrdom. So then if you would like to assert something new, I would say that what is really unique and significant understanding of martyrdom when we use Kierkegaard's notion of leap of faith. That's one. And then the last one, this is the last, Father, a technical comment. If you notice in your findings, number 2, you mentioned there, the Vietnamese martyrs are the most profound example of martyrdom, something like that. You can go back to that. I may not be precise, but I think it was stated there clearly. Uh, I like the confidence. I like the affirmation. The most profound example of martyrs. Yes, you can say that. You're entitled to say that only if there is a substantial comparative study of Vietnamese martyrs and the other Christian martyrs. So I would advise that you revisit that part also so that your paper is not sounding uh, very ethnocentric along that finding. If I would refer you back to that, it's on page 65. Vietnamese martyrs are the most profound examples of followers of Jesus Christ. So this needs
Thank you, sir.
rethinking. So that's all, and thank you for learning from you.
Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Ibera, for your sound and clear comments and interventions, as well as your observations also. So it's my turn. On my part, my first observation is that, of course, it's about martyrdom. However, you begin with an understanding of martyrdom which is very theological. And again, you are going to understand, evaluate a notion of martyrdom which is theological through philosophy. No, that's my issue actually, because it seems to me that the theological and the philosophical has been mixed together, or have been mixed together here. Of course, the theological and the philosophical, though they coincide, but they are very different. For example, in many places of your work, on page 58, page 57, and other places, you talk about martyrdom, or a martyr who is a one who submits or subjects his will to the will of God. right? That's your definition of the martyr. Submission to the will of God. Well, as a philosopher, I would ask you to make a certain clarification because you have not actually fully explained in your work whether their death, the suffering that they have been undergoing, inflicted by their persecutor, is a will of God. So that's just to clarify.
Yeah, I don't think uh, the will of to be suffer or to be killed, or that is the will of God. I don't think that is the. But in terms of for me that I in terms of the martyrs that submit their will to God, in the sense that they are subjective, or they are two individual before God, and as the two individual before God, in terms of Kierkegaard, that they can offer everything, and they willing to die or to live or to die. That depends on the God's will.
Okay, so where is the will of God there for you to maintain that really martyrdom is that we can reconcile the theological and the philosophical? Because I know where you are coming from, no? You insert there the will of God, but it's really very difficult to reconcile if where can we somehow find a demarcation wherein the martyr is following the will of God. At the same time, the suffering he should face or he should undergo is not the will of God. So if it is not the will of God, will he be considered still a martyr? In some sense, that's my confusion, and you have not yet treated this in your work. So I hope to further improve it, to give a further clarification, you can have a additional explanation regarding this. And the second question, corollary to that, those persecutors, are they, could we consider them wrong or bad people because they persecute, they put to suffering these are people who are somehow in some sense divergent from what the society is upholding. What is your opinion? How can we view to term to somehow to consider them persecutors for me is something unjust because you are already beginning with a certain judgmental point of view. How would you treat this in your work? The role of those who inflicted suffering and pain to these people.
Uh, Please, can you give me a clearer the question, just short but clear, so that I can. Yes.
I will rephrase my
Yes.
question.
Yes.
Since martyrdom cannot take place without people inflicting pain and suffering on other people, for example, the martyrs, how can we view their role from the perspective of philosophy? Are we going to condemn these people, or what would be for you the most reasonable, balanced, fair treatment to these people?
Uh, I think in this one is I can identify this situation. Something is like on a way of the of absurdity, observe of the deity, but the absurdity that is overcome, the martyrs that they overcome by faith.
Okay, would you agree that they are persecutors or tormentors as a philosopher?
Just in the sense of to to present this thesis that I stand on that point as the philosopher.
Okay, so they are bad people in some sense.
No, I don't mean that they are bad
They
people,
inflict.
but even the good or the bad people that also have to face with something is the observability of life.
So my comment is that you need to situate martyrdom in a certain temporal, sociological, and historical understanding. Because without this consideration, as a philosopher, you should not lose your grounding from the historical and sociological. In some sense, that these martyrs also, from the perspective of these people, are belligerent people. They destroy the law and order. And as a society, they have the right to defend their existence in such a way that the social order has to be upheld also, or else if the social order is disturbed, it will create also death and suffering in this society. And it's but natural, well, it's very Bergsonian to defend oneself because each one is actually looking for its own existence. They are just thinking of their own existence as a society also. Do you agree with me?
Yes, Father.
Okay. Now, my other understanding is that, yes, I know where Professor or Dr. Ibarra is coming from regarding the absurdity of Kierkegaard. Yes, one must accept that the truth is absurd because if the truth is something which is not observed, there is no necessity of faith. Actually, he discussed that in the postscript. However, what I'm looking in your work, for it to become clear, is the differentiation between objective and subjective truth. Okay, I think I would recommend this to add to make your work clearer, to distinguish truth as subjectivity and truth as objective, or what Kierkegaard calls objective reflection and subjective reflection. Okay, just to test you whether you have read this part in the postscript, how can you differentiate objective and subjective reflection?
Uh, for me, that what I understood that subjective is that is reflect or to reflect by the oneself to experience by his experience, but the object is that something that is given by other.
Okay, and the truth is objective or subjective for Kierkegaard?
Truth is for Kierkegaard, truth is subjective.
Okay. So how can you relate that to martyrdom? I wish also that martyrdom actually is the manifestation of truth as subjectivity, in the sense that a truth which is objective, you do not have a certain relation with it because an objective truth does not need a subject, like a mathematical formula, right? It will be 1 plus 1 equals 2, whether Viet exists or Father Kins exists, it's always 1 plus 1 equals 2. No?
Yes.
It's a truth wherein we cannot have a relation with. However, subjective truth is a truth that needs you. That's why the individual is needed, the subject is needed, which depends on you also. So I think you can discuss martyrdom also as a concretization of this truth as subjectivity. So that's my suggestion. Because it is in martyrdom that truth as subjectivity emerges, right? A truth that you cannot die for, actually you mention it, it's very good. It's not actually truth because truth is becomes acceptable when there is someone who is willing to stand for it, or ultimately there is someone who died for it. A truth that is not worth dying for is not a truth. It's a mere objective one. So I hope you can incorporate this element because I've read your work. I really appreciate it also because of the effort you have given. The citations are very good. You have written very well also, comprehensible, understandable. However, there is lacking in terms of precision. You have not, you failed to treat martyrdom as a concretization of truth as subjectivity. So if you have incorporated this, I think it your thesis will become very much substantial. Okay, the absurdity, the paradox must be there. Okay, my last question is that does Kierkegaard would or is it possible that truth for Kierkegaard is a person?
The truth. You mean that the truth is the person in Kierkegaard or not? Huh?
Yes, but somehow assume the characteristic of a person, and for you, in what way?
I think that is for me. That I understood that the truth in this one is maybe something is a relation.
Yes, that's
Yes.
very good. So now, what would be the logical consequence if the truth is a kind of relation?
And that is because it is the relation, so that one when one has that relation already, so that he can live for that one, live for the truth, and something that is like the uncertainty.
Okay, just last because you have provoked a new insight in my mind while we are having discussion. Actually, I remembered reading your work. I was asking, you have not also discussed martyr in because you elaborated in your work the experience of the martyr. Can you cite or present to me in what page can I discover wherein you have discussed the mystical experience of the martyr in the sense that they have a certain relation to a higher being, and this kind of experience has somehow given them the courage to hold on to this truth that they have been testifying or witnessing to because of this relationship, or because you discussed relationship, a kind of mystical experience. Could you present an idea of this or point out in your work a certain idea of this or like this?
Yes, Father. I think in the page 51, I also mentioned one of the story or narrative of one martyrs, that he claimed his faithfulness or his uh, honor to God. By the way, that is the persecutor that forced him to step on the cross, and the cross is something is the symbolize of the love, or the one that is the martyr that worship, and they rely on love the cross, and he said that the way refused to step on that, and he also told to the persecutor that I cannot today I cannot step over the cross I worshipped yesterday. So the cross is something is just symbolized to the ultimate that is for them, that is God, is the Christ.
Okay, that's all. With regard to my corrections, I will send you the commented soft copy.
Yes.
Because I find typographical errors also, but they are very few,
Yes.
and it's well done technically for my part. No, so no need for me to mention all this. I'll just send you this, and kindly scroll, because you can only find a few of them. So scroll each page and you can find my comments. Okay, that's
Thank,
all for me.
thank you,
Let's
Father.
go to your advisor, Professor Eugenio.
Thank you, Dr. Ibera and Father Kins, for the questions and for the clarifications that will surely help Brother Viet improve the final manuscript. And congratulations, Brother Viet, for writing and defending your thesis despite the circumstances. No, um, I would just like to answer, if I may, some of the questions raised by Father Kins and Dr. Ibera. I think it was difficult for Brother Viet to define martyrdom in a philosophical sense that martyrdom is beyond philosophical, no? And thank you, Dr. Ibera, for pointing out the ethnocentric part, medyo ethnocentric part of the thesis. And for the question of Father Kins on the the ones afflicting the martyrs, I think that will be answered by the notion of cultural relativism, which I think is beyond Brother Viet's scope. Because when we discuss cultural relativism and ethnocentrism or ethical relativism, that would be an ethical paper na, other than an existential theological part or existential theological paper, which I think what Brother Viet is leading to. So, but we will take into consideration in answering that, in a sense that it will become an overview of a pro and an anti stand on the martyrdom. So we will be working on that. But again, thank you very much for those questions, and congratulations, Brother Viet. I know it wasn't easy, and you have been diligent in writing and persistent in your thesis writing. So that's it. We will work on the final manuscript. Thank you.
Thank you, Mom.
Uh, this is really the last. I was not able to mention it a while ago. I observed in chapter 2 the use of the referencing style. I would like to verify, for example, with your advisor and you, Biet, in chapter 2, uh, the use of, we call it, I do not know if these are direct quotations that are within the text. For example, there are so many from page 16 onwards. You can see every line or every sentence has a footnote. But if you go back to it, there is no quotation. So I would like to verify if these are your words really, or you have quoted it directly from the source. For example, page 16, first line on number 1. Uh, Soren Kierkegaard was a Danish thinker who is known as the father of existentialism. on that after period there is a footnote. Uh, and similar to that, there are so many, almost every sentence onwards, no? Uh, are these your words or you quoted it directly? If not, if these are not your words, it is advisable that you put it in open and close quotation marks. But if they are your paraphrase, they are your words, then this is correct. So maybe this, I'm saying this just to avoid plagiarism, or you may have missed the quotation, open quotation and close quotation mark, if ever. I'm just verifying it. I'm not accusing you of plagiarism yet. You have to verify again, no?
Yes.
So thank you for that.
Thank you po. So may I invite everyone to please leave the room for us to deliberate and evaluate the final result of Viet's thesis defense. Thank you for attending.
Nice, Viet.
Nice, Kutinjiang.